Welcome to episode 33 of the Everyday Sens podcast. I'm Jack Richardson, joined by Brendan Parks on this Saturday, August 26th. And we are recording on a Saturday. This is going to come out on a Saturday. So just if anyone has any Sens news that they would like us to talk about, that's how you know you've got the date that we're talking on. We don't expect anything big to happen. Shane Pinto remains unsigned. Igor Sokolov remains unsigned. No big moves have happened yet as we gear up towards training camp. There were a few deals, though, around the league. And actually, obviously, the elephant in the room is the Auston Matthews deal, which we will get into and how it compares to the Sens contracts, all of that. But some other RFA deals around the league. You got Alexis Lafreniere, big comparison there with Tim Stützle. Hint, he will be coming up with Auston Matthews as well. So, Brennan, how are you doing on this Saturday, August 26th? We are getting closer to the season.
Yeah, it's creeping up on us here. It's 26th, and preseason is going to be starting training camp very soon. So, we're going to get some Sens news soon, but again, we're creating the content for now. I know Pinto on his front too. I think his agent told Ian Mendez that it was like all quiet, so no real traction going on there. I'd assume the same for Sokolov. I mean, we haven't heard a thing about it. So, yeah, I don't know what's going on those two players and if, Pierre's working some magic here to get Pinto signed, but if there's any sort of Pinto holdout, I can assure you people, including us, are not going to be very pleased. We've been doing these comparisons, and obviously Shane Pinto on the third line is one of the biggest reasons why Ottawa, their bottom six a lot of the time is superior to other teams' bottom sixes because of Pinto a lot of the time. So if he's not there, it's a huge blow. I'm still very confident it's going to get done, though. Like, I think that whether they have to trade somebody or whatever it is, I just don't see them going into the season without Pinto. So, yeah, we're good on that. This Matthews contract has been the main kind of focus of the league here the last couple of days because he obviously is like the highest paid player in history, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I'm doing well today. Obviously, I started working a new job, so it's been early mornings, waking up at 5 a.m., and I'm not used to that. I'm not a morning person, so the last 3 days, I got up at 5, and yesterday we were both just like, yeah, we do not have the energy for a pod today. It's going to be, super low energy if we record, so we decided to push it to today. And yeah, we're going to get into it. So if you want to start with that little Timmy and Matthews thing, we can get on with that.
Yeah, let's do it. And before, admittedly, I was looking for something other than let's talk about Auston Matthews comparing with Stützle, but it works because Tim Stützle is going to come up in this one as well. We'll quickly touch on the first overall pick from 2020, the year Stützle was drafted, and Jake Sanderson, mind you. Alexis Lafreniere signs a 2-year, I think $2 million deal. Under 2.5 though, actually kind of a good blueprint for Pinto maybe. What's interesting about that, I saw something, it was the lowest contract out of an entry-level deal for any first overall pick in the cap era. So if that's any indication, not ideal for Alexis Lafreniere, but I think he'll do fine. But let's rope that in now with the Auston Matthews extension. On the complete flip side, the highest paid player in NHL history as of next season in terms of single season salary at 13.25. So the reason we're bringing up Tim Stützle is because widely considered one of the best contracts in the NHL, analytically, eyeball, whatever you want to call it. I think the Athletics analytic model had it as the fourth best deal in terms of the term and how much he produces, all of that, juxtaposed with the Battle of Ontario, right down the 401, a team that the Sens, admittedly, again, are trying to catch. Toronto's been the regular season pinnacle, let's say. Signed their franchise center to a very lucrative contract. So let's talk about it. I know it's on the surface, first of all, and we'll get into it because we're going to do a Leafs and Sens comparison. So this is going to be a big Battle of Ontario episode, if you want to call it. Right out of the gate for me, I know Auston Matthews is a better player than Tim Stützle. That's not up for debate right now as it stands on August 26th, 2023. But is he $5 million better? I'll throw that to you there, Brennan.
Yeah, so this all starts, let's do a little story time. It starts with a tweet that I put up in a post, which was a bit of a meme. Like, it was kind of just funny because I like to toy with the Toronto fans, but then I regret it because they send their entire city in waves into my replies, and for days and weeks, it just, the notifications keep popping up. That's all I see. So, yeah, it started, basically, I just put the tweet of Matthews signing his contract, then I put the little Stützle meme where he's like looking up and pointing, and yeah, and I said, likes Tim Stützle signed for 8.35 million, by the way. And this was met with, like I said, the backlash. But I think it was taken the wrong way or something, because like everybody's replying with, well, so big surprise, the better player gets paid more. And like I put in the comments too, in the replies I said, two things can be true, right? Like Auston Matthews is the better player right now for sure, and he probably always will be. I mean, he's arguably like the second best player in the league. But Tim Stützle can also be on one of the league's best contracts. That's more so the point of my tweet there. And yes, I was like poking at them with the meme, but that was more so the point of my tweet was like Tim Stützle at 21 years old just scored 39 goals and 90 points. Not to mention he broke out as a number one center in his first season playing center full time, which is like arguably the most important position in hockey. And that's like the hardest thing to find is a real number one center. So Timmy's that, right? And then, you know, his defensive game improved. He's a penalty killer. He's a power play specialist. Like he's everything. And he's making, you know, $8.35 million. But not just that, he's signed for 8 years. He committed to the Sens for 8 years through his prime. Like they're going to have him in all of his best years, right? So when you consider that, and then Matthews signed for 4 years, correct? It was 4 years, yeah. So like, I don't know. For me, like the Timmy contract, that just speaks to how good it is. And we can talk about Ottawa as a whole. Because again, Pierre Dorion, his ability to sign contracts has probably been his best trait here over the last few years. He's gotten so many players. I mean, they're not paying anyone over $9 million right now, and they've got almost their whole core locked up, right? Toronto's paying Matthews, obviously the huge contract, but then they've got Marner, they've got Nylander coming up, they've got Riley and Tavares, right? So, I mean, you just look at that blueprint, and then you look at Ottawa's, and Tim is kind of the, like you said, the pinnacle of it, and I'm just blown away. And I think that, like I said, Toronto fans, because I know they're going to watch this, and I know they're going to go in the comments and find something, but Auston Matthews is definitely the better player, 100% agree, but I think that, like, ignoring the fact that Tim Stützle signed that awesome contract for 8 years at less than $9 million, and then became a near 100-point scorer, and he probably will be a 100-point scorer next year, that's what we have to recognize. And I think just $5 million is no small thing. The better player is going to get paid more money, sure, but $5 million more? I mean, that's a lot of money. Like that can easily sign you or trade for a really quality top 4 defenseman or top 6 forward. So like they just signed Tarasenko for $5 million, right? I mean, to have Stützle and Tarasenko, I mean, that's, you know, that makes Ottawa a lot better. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit on the comparison front and maybe just that Matthews contract in general. Like I will say I'm not even really like opposed to the money they paid him. Like I mean, they made him the highest paid player, but he kind of deserves it, right? Like he might have left if they didn't. So I'm not even saying it's a bad contract. I'm just saying it makes Ottawa's contracts look really, really good.
Yeah, and it's not even Ottawa, right? Like obviously you're going to get comments from people saying, "Oh, you're just trying to be like the Leafs, you're trying to compare." But this is the type of deal where every other team, every other fan base in the NHL is going to be going around to their own contracts and their own team and looking at, "Oh, I'd rather have, you know, like the Hurricanes are definitely going, I'd rather have Sebastian Aho for 9.5 than Matthews for 13.5." Like that's just a fact. Every team's doing it. Every fan base is doing it. So in terms of how does Ottawa compare? Yeah, like every contract Ottawa signed, no one on their team is in Matthews' category. That's not fair. That's not crazy to say. They could be because they're younger. They're all younger, but they all took less than what their market value is going to be. Brady Tkachuk set the precedent. Even when he held out, he got 8.2 at the time. It was a bit of an overpay for what he had done, but it's already a steal of a contract. So what's important about Matthews, and the first thing I thought is this is one of the first signs in the NHL of a superstar taking everything that they're worth. And like we said, he's probably worth that money. I completely agree, but it's the term, right? Like, yes, let's say Stützle had signed, let's say that both players, you know, you could even use McDavid, let's say, okay. Like McDavid signed an 8-year deal, but he got 12.5. Like he's underpaid in terms of value, but it's not a super big bargain. Like that at the time when he signed it, and for years, he was the highest paid in the league. So you look at a guy like McDavid and Matthews, where not many other superstars are maximizing their value, right? And I think by the time Matthews is 31, when this is over, he'll have 100 and something career earnings, which is just unheard of in the NHL, right? Because everyone signs the 8-year deal. They just take the security, which you can't blame them for. But I tweeted out right away that Matthews and his agent, like, they deserve some credit just for kind of trying, at least I should have said trying, but, you know, trying to change the landscape of contracts for NHL superstars, because that's what other sports do. No other sport signs 8-year deals like it's nothing. The NHL does. So in that sense, it's really interesting. The problem with that, though, and the ripple effect it has, is on the rest of the team. Like I mentioned with Brady Tkachuk, his deal, the 8.2 sets the precedent, right? If you're Stützle's agent going into the contract negotiations last summer, Pierre Dorion's probably saying you can't come in much higher, if at all, than the 8.2 because that's our captain and our best player at the time. So Stützle gets a little bit more. And I remember too, I don't want to call them, I want to say it was the Andy and Strick podcast or something like that. I think Andy Strickland's the guy's name, but I can't remember. Maybe Cam Jensen. I'm blanking on the name, but yeah. So I remember when Stützle signed, there was a discourse that they had, the two of them, about why is this kid getting paid more than Brady Tkachuk? And look, like that's fine. It was measly, like it's 100,000 more, let's say, right? Not much of the cap. But my point is that because that precedent was set, that's why the Sens probably weren't super comfortable offering to brink at 9 if that's what he was looking for to stay. That's why Toronto is now in cap hell because they've got Mitch Marner, who honestly Matthews kind of relies on. Like they're a bit of a duo, and I think more of a duo than people realize. Like Matthews is the better player, but they go well together. So if you're Marner and his agent with 2 years left on your deal, like you did on the last contract, I'm going to say I'm worth just as much as that guy. Give me 13 because that would be the raise they both get. Marner would get 12.9 to his 10.9. Matthews got 13.2 to his 11 point whatever he was making already. So my point is the precedent that it sets. So in terms of how Ottawa compares in the team, and especially because the Leafs haven't done anything in the playoffs yet of significance, and those superstar players disappeared off the face of the planet in the second round after finally slaying the dragon, I think Ottawa compares very well, even if we haven't seen them in the playoffs yet. You know, for all we know, Stützle, Batherson, Norris, even Tkachuk could just not be playoff performers, which is another fear that you can have. And we actually, little teaser, we will get into that on a members pod moving forward. We've got what's your biggest worry going into this season? That's probably going to be part of it. But my long rant here is that I like where Ottawa stands in the sense that not that they have better players than Matthews or even Marner for that instance, and we will get into that in a little bit here. It's just the fact that they have set a precedent, which is what most NHL teams do. So at the same time, while I'm applauding Matthews and his agent for trying to reset the market, until other teams do it, it's not going to work. So I like where Ottawa stands going with the traditional 8-year deal for everyone who wants one.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're spot on with that. Is that like Marner now he needs a new deal, and then Nylander too is another one, right? So I think they're gonna have to trade somebody over there. But like everybody looks at their big contracts right now, like before Matthews signed this, and they've kind of like the whole league has looked at that and said like clearly this blueprint isn't working. Where you're signing a few big stars to these massive contracts, but then that's obviously hurting the rest of your lineup, right? Goaltending's been a problem for them in the past. Depth as well. It's just that hasn't seemed to work for them. So now they're kind of re-upping on that front of just paying these guys even more, which, yeah, it's necessary to keep them. But at the same time, I think they're going to still suffer from those same issues, right? Where they're lacking depth and they can't fill out their lineup and injuries are going to just kill them because of that. So I think you're completely right. And Ottawa, yeah, like they've had a lot of guys buy in here too is another thing. I mean, I think Toronto, obviously, they get a lot of attention and everybody loves that. But at the same time, there are a lot of negatives to getting attention, right? Like, obviously, Ottawa, it sucks when we don't get recognition and stuff, while Toronto does. But at the same time, like in Toronto, I almost feel like there's a premium because these players have to deal with the media harassment, right? Like, they have to deal with the fan harassment. Like, they go through so much, especially in Toronto now because of the playoff like failures they've had. They deal with so much stuff as players there, and there's been guys that go there and want to leave. I think recently a few guys even said that. Can't remember who, but they go there and they might want to leave because like you go from a different market to Toronto, and all of a sudden you're dealing with so much more pressure, right? You have to handle the pressure, and a lot of guys it's just not for them. So I think Ottawa being able to have guys buy in, right? They've, like I said, they've got their core all under $9 million. Sanderson, I'm gonna assume will be under $9 million, but he might even get like a massive payday depending on if he signs this year or next year. Either way, like they're set up so much better than Toronto on a contract front, in my opinion. And I think, like we said, going back to Tim, it's not that Tim's a better player; it's that Tim is on a much better contract, and the term is so notable there. And again, I think Tim Stützle is a top 15 center in the league, and I know we're kind of talking Matthews versus Stützle. He's not on Matthews' level, but I still think he is one of the better centers in the league. And I think that after next year, especially, he's really going to be one of the better centers in the league. We talked about it before, how I think he's going to be competing with the Braden Points of the world, right? And that's top 10. So If we're talking $5 million less for a center who is close to Matthews in his prime, like, I mean, that again, $5 million is a big bump. Like, that's a big thing that you can use on your roster. So, yeah, I'm pretty much good on that. I think we're kind of going to get into more of the Ottawa versus Toronto comparison. But yeah, do you have anything else on the Matthews contract and on Ottawa?
Yeah, like, and this is if there's a Leafs fan who's sticking around for all of what we're saying and not just nitpicking little things and trying to, get all rattled at us in the comments, because, and we keep saying this because we teased out, or you teased out on the Twitter yesterday, that we were going to do our comparison tomorrow, and you already had replies being like, why are you even comparing? They're not even close. Like that, anyway, that's why we kind of are prefacing that people are going to complain, because they are. And we've had it from Buffalo, even some Lightning and Panthers fans. We're just bracing for the Leafs stuff, and it's fun, and that's why we're doing it. But it's, anyway, if you were to ask, just from a non-Sens fan perspective, for the tenure of Matthews' next deal, so let's include it as this next season and the next 4, so 5 more years. If you had to take Jack Hughes at $8 million for the next 5 years, or Auston Matthews at 13.25 for the next 5 years, even with the cap going up, whatever, I'd probably take Jack Hughes. And the point I'm trying to make is that we as Sens fans know how close Tim Stützle is to Jack Hughes. I just don't think the rest of the league does, right? He doesn't have that recognition yet. So if you put it in those terms, and it's maybe, I don't know what, a 50-50 split or something like that, that tells you all you need to know, because, yeah, I'd take Tim Stützle the next 5 years over Matthews on that contract. So that's why I'm a little bullish on Stützle, but obviously for a ton of other reasons. Sens put out a great video the other day about going to Germany. I guess their media people followed him for a day in Germany. He was training with Mo Sider. It was an awesome video, like 8 minutes long. It's on their YouTube page, Twitter, Instagram's everywhere. So check that out if you haven't. If you didn't like Tim Stützle already, you're going to love him even more. And he's putting in the work this offseason. So he's primed for a big season. So let's move in, Brennan, if we're ready here for some Leafs Sens comparison. We kind of touched on it a little already. We're going to do it again, and we're just going to start right away with the top line. So why don't you kick us off? We just had that Matthews Stützle discussion, but let's do the depth chart as a whole. I'm actually curious to see what the Leafs depth chart looks like.
Yeah, so we'll get it up here. So we're going to start with that top line, like you said, and we always have to remind, just because there are going to be new people who come in and look at the depth chart. So it is the cap-friendly depth chart. If you're not on YouTube, you can see it on YouTube. We're going to go through it. So it is sorted by money, we believe, and the lines might not be super accurate as to what's going to happen, but again, we don't know. Training camp hasn't even started. For Ottawa, we're going to kind of put like Tarasenko on the top line, even if it might be Giroux, whatever. We're going to kind of sort it more by player tiers. That's what we've been doing, and it works a little better than just line by line, but we will still go line by line for the sake of this being not too complicated. So yeah, for the Leafs, we've got on the top line Tyler Bertuzzi, Auston Matthews, and Mitch Marner. Now, that's a heavy punching top line, let's say. I think for Ottawa, like we've been going with Tkachuk, Stützle, and Tarasenko. Obviously, those are 3 really good players, and Tkachuk and Stützle are part of Ottawa's, maybe their 2 biggest core players. But I mean, for this comparison with Toronto, I am going to take Toronto's top line just because, again, we just talked about Matthews and Stützle. I love Timmy, like arguably my favorite player, but Auston Matthews is arguably the second best player in the league. So I'm definitely taking Matthews there, and Marner as well. And Matthews, again, he's coming off of a bit of a down year, but he's still scored 40 goals and 85 points in 74 games. Which is, I think he can be expected to even boost that up again next year. And then Marner's a 100-point player, and someone who I would take him over Brady for the skill, although I think there's a good argument that in the playoffs, Brady is someone who can outproduce and outplay Marner for sure. I would love to see this top 3 for both teams in a playoff series. Let me say that. For the regular season, again, it's hard for me to say like, oh, well, Brady and Tim are going to take another step, so we can project that and then take them. I want to see it first. I think for now, Marner and Matthews are on the higher level. And again, Bertuzzi, you look at his production there, 8 goals and 30 points in 50 games. Not impressive, but he is that tenacity level player who kind of comes in and gives them a bit of bite in Toronto. So I do love the addition of Bertuzzi. He was a guy that Ottawa was watching, obviously, too. A lot of us Sens fans. So I'm not going to pretend like we didn't like Bertuzzi when he was a free agent. He's a good acquisition for them. I probably would take, whether it's Tarasenko or Giroux, but at the same time, I think that trio is just very hard to beat in Toronto. And I do want to preface this whole comparison again by saying it would be really funny to just like troll Toronto fans throughout this whole thing and kind of say, no, I'm definitely taking like Brady and Timmy over Matthews and Marner, right? Like they'd be going crazy in the replies, but I'm not going to do that. We're trying to be unbiased here. And I will say, although we don't like Toronto, they do have a good lineup and they are the favorite in the Atlantic, really. So it's going to be, hard to really pick a lot of Ottawa's pieces over them. But for the top line, for me, I am going to go with Toronto, and that kind of doesn't really matter who you change. You could put Giroux on Ottawa's top line. I'm still taking Toronto's. And yeah, what about you?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm in the same boat, and honestly, the way this depth chart is kind of lined out, the Leafs have a very good forward core, like very, very good. Best one, obviously, we've seen so far. And I think with a lot of the ones we've done Florida, Buffalo, and Tampa. With those ones, sorry, and we did Boston. With the exception of Boston, I want to say every other team had, like Buffalo was a bit debatable about the top guys, but then the depth kind of canceled out. It was close. With Florida, it was Barkov and Kachuk over everyone else. But then we like the Sens depth at forward better than the Panthers. Boston, we like the Sens forward depth better. This is the one where I like legitimately, and I'm a Sens fan. I love what the Sens have done. I think they've had a great offseason, supplemented well, and I think the growth for their younger guys will be good. I think the Leafs forward core is just better. And that's not a knock on the Sens. Like you said, this is the Atlantic Division favorite. One of the cup favorites, actually. So, yeah, like that top line, the Bertuzzi is definitely in the same, probably a tier lower than Stützle and Kachuk and maybe even Tarasenko. Maybe they're a bit closer, but the Matthews-Marner thing takes it a bit further. Like I'm taking that top line over it because I think it's kind of the same thinking as if DeBrincat would have worked with Stützle so well. Like Bertuzzi just seems like a perfect fit for those two, I feel like, right? Which I know you hit on with the grit and everything. We kind of had our eye on him as well in the free agent market, but I'll just go to the second line, and this is where like I'm taking Josh Norris over John Tavares, and I'll take Giroux over Domi, let's say, but like Nylander to me again feels just like a trump card, and just for the second line because he's a top line player. Like if this was actually depth, he would be in where Bertuzzi is. Then it's a bit more of a discussion maybe, but if that's what they're rolling with on their second line, then like I'm going to say I'll take Norris, I take Giroux, but Nylander's better than Batherson, I think. And actually, Nylander's probably the best player in that group of six. So I'll take the Sens line, but Nylander's, again, the best player. Like, he's in that different tier than I think those guys. I would put Nylander in the same tier as Kachuk and Stützle and probably Giroux. I think that's fair. Now, Sens are younger, which we have to mention because they are. And what we're seeing from the Leafs guys right now is what they are, and what they are is quite good. But Nylander to me, Kachuk and Stützle and all these guys, like they could have career years next year, and then we're wondering where is the ceiling for these guys? Is it a top 10 talent in the league for both of them? So that's where I go with the second line. I'm not sure how you feel about that because I did like Max Domi. I think that's another good signing. Like they've had some sneaky good moves, and it'll just be about them putting it all together.
Yeah, and I agree. I think I would take their second line to Toronto's. So yeah, if you're not on the YouTube, it's Domi, Tavares, and Nylander versus for Ottawa it would be Giroux, Norris, and Batherson is kind of the way we've been doing it. So obviously Ottawa's second line very impressive and hard to beat, but I do think that this Toronto lineup, and I think they're close. Like I don't think this is some huge thing. And again, if Norris comes back and is like a 40 goal scorer and a point per game player, that puts a wrinkle in our thinking here. But yeah, I think that Toronto's second line, it's just their top six as a whole, I would take over Ottawa's just because, again, you said it too, they're all in their prime. Like the Ottawa's group can be expected to take another step, but we haven't seen it. Toronto's group is playing their best years right now. So really, really hard to bypass Toronto's top six. I mean, they have a lot of star power there. Again, if we're factoring in the playoffs, maybe we think differently, but we haven't seen Ottawa in the playoffs either, so you can't really say anything yet. But yeah, I mean the second line, Nylander, I think you hit the nail on the head. He's a trump card. He makes like you can't pass on it, right? I mean he's a ridiculously good and talented player. So credit to Toronto for building a good top six. I think they added 2 top 6 forwards this summer through free agency, which is hard to do. Did you have something else?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say they turned Bunting into Bertuzzi, and then they turned Kerfoot into Domi, and that's just upgrade twice, right? So they're better than they were last season, which the Sens are too, I think. But that's a great upgrade for the top 6 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they added 2 good players. So I hate to credit the Leafs, but credit to them. Their top 6 looks good. Hopefully, it just looks good on paper and then doesn't work out like we see sometimes, but we'll see. So yeah, going on to the third line anyways, we've got Kelly Yarncroke, David Kampf, and Sam Lafferty versus Ottawa. We've been doing Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, and Dominic Kubalik. So this is where I'm going to take Ottawa's third line, and you can debate that. I mean, Yarncroke's a good player. He played in their top 6 a little bit and whatnot, but I mean, you've got Kubalik, who, I mean, like you see it with Yarncroke right there. They're both 20-goal scorers pretty consistently, I think, and they're comparable. I like Kubalik more than every player on Toronto's third line right there. I think Kubalik could be a fit on Ottawa's second line as well, and I think that playing in the third line is kind of the luxury of acquiring more depth this year than star power, is that now you've got that really nice third line. I'm taking Shane Pinto over David Kampf. I mean, that's easy for me. I think Kampf is a good defensive forward, but Pinto, he's a great two-way forward, so he kind of adds that element of offense. And then Lafferty, I liked Lafferty when he was in Chicago. I wanted Ottawa to acquire him. But again, Ridley Gregg or whoever you want to compare there, you could take him over it. I'm still taking Ottawa's third line as a whole. I think that, whether it's Gregg or if they manage to keep Joseph or whoever it is, you can factor it in. I just like their 3 players more than Toronto's, and I think that Toronto's third line is probably average in my mind, whereas Ottawa's is good to great. Like it's well above average if healthy. So we've said this before as well. It's going to be hard to beat Ottawa's bottom 6 or third line for me anyways, just because I think, like I said, the luxury of signing Tarasenko now has pushed Kubalik down, and they still have Joseph on the roster, but they have nice depth on the third line. And then I'll quickly hit on the fourth line. You can hit on the bottom 6 too. Fourth line, I mean, I'll take Toronto's just because I don't really know who Ottawa's is going to be. Like, we've got Kastelik, I definitely like over like Pontus Holmberg. For Toronto on here, it's listed as Matthew Nyes, Pontus Holmberg, and Ryan Reeves. I don't know if Nyes is going to play in a fourth line role. I would assume not, but at the same time, who knows? They need to win now, so maybe. But yeah, I would take Kastelik over those 3 guys, but then I mean, Reeves versus like Zach McEwen, I would take Reeves, I guess. I mean, it doesn't really matter, honestly, but they're both just bruisers. And then Ottawa's, like, I've been putting prospect on their fourth line when I do the depth charts just because it could be Yuri Schmeichel, it could be Angus Crookshank, it could be Igor Sokolov, it could be like literally anybody, it could be Parker Kelly. So whoever that is, I mean, we'll see. I'll take Toronto's fourth line for now, but that's kind of irrelevant. I think as a whole, I would take Ottawa's bottom 6. Just because of that strong third line, which I feel is among the best in the league. So how do you feel about the bottom 6 groups after that talented top 6 group for Toronto?
Again, I'm on the same boat, I think. I'd expect Nyes will play on the third line and Lafferty probably slides down. And in that case, the third line actually maybe becomes a discussion because I love Ridley Gregg, but I'm going to take Nyes over him just because of what we've seen in the playoffs for Nyes. But yeah, like I'll take Ottawa's. I like Kubalik more than Yarncroke, and then I like Pinto more than Kampf. I don't think that's crazy to say. But again, even with Lafferty on that fourth line, I think more I'm taking the Leafs fourth line just because this is such a question mark in Ottawa, right? And not in the sense that it's going to be bad. It's just we don't know who's going to be on it. It could be Igor, it could be Crookshank, like it could be any mix of prospects, which will impact how we feel about it. But so overall, with the forwards there, as we wrap this up, it's Ottawa's third line and then Toronto everything else. Overall, I guess, for each line, which I kind of expected, to be honest. I'm not really shocked by that. Now, back to our discussion about Stützle and Matthews and, Tavares and all that. Like, money is a huge factor here, and we're about to see why as we scroll to the defense in Toronto, which has just been completely neglected for a decade pretty much, since they started this rebuild. They've got Morgan Riley and TJ Brody as their top pairing, Jake McCabe and John Klingberg, so rounding out their top 4 with that, and then it's Timothy Liljegren and Mark Giordano. So I don't think it's as bad as it maybe sounds on paper, let's say. The problem is Klingberg feels like a bit of a question mark, and I've listened to Leafs radio and stuff because I think they're fantastic. It's the biggest market in the NHL, so they're going to have great radio coverage regardless. So I like listening to them about signings and stuff like that. Like, they're pretty lukewarm on Klingberg. They don't know how to feel about it, just in the sense that you've got Liljegren there. It's kind of like if the Sens went out and signed someone who blocked Brandstrom from a top 4 role, where they were ready to give it to him and then just sign a random guy for 1 year. I'll let you go first on the defense because I'm kind of still deciding, and not that I'm going to go either way based on what you say, but like I overall, just first glance, I like Ottawa's more. this is one of those moments where Ottawa, like on paper, you hear the names and you think they're better, but Toronto, like sneaky depth. I think Liljegren on that third pairing is pretty good.
Yeah, so I'll start here. I'll say that I'm going to take Ottawa's top four, like, far and away. So, again, Toronto, we've got Morgan Riley, TJ Brody on their top pairing, and then Jake McCabe, John Klingberg, and then Mark Giordano and Timothy Liljegren. Yeah, so Ottawa's top four, we've mentioned it, sort of like their third line. I think that they are better than a lot of teams, and that's just because, once again, we've got Chabot, Chychrun, and Sanderson, and then Zub, obviously. But the three first ones are game breakers. They aren't just like your typical, you have one really good defenseman with a good complement. They're all game breakers. Like, they are all impact defensemen, who I would consider top 30 in the league, with Sanderson maybe coming up on that this year. But regardless, like, having three guys like that is just not normal. Like, that's extremely good. Like, going out and acquiring Chychrun was a great move because it's not just a compliment to Chabot. Chychrun is his own, like, star defenseman, right? They're both stars. So they're very dynamic in a sense. Whereas Toronto here, you've got Riley and Chabot have kind of been compared their whole careers so far, since Chabot came into the league. And that's fair. I mean, Riley, I'm not huge on Riley like some people are, but I do think that him and Chabot are comparable. But then again, like, they've got TJ Brody with Riley. And if we compare, like, Jacob Chychrun, I mean, there's not even a discussion. Brody is a compliment defenseman, right, a defensive guy, whereas Chychrun is a dynamic, top 25, like, star. Like, it's not even close. And so that top pairing for me is just far and away Ottawa. And then, like, McCabe and Klingberg, you said it, Klingberg, he's a big name, but he has not been good, and he's terrible defensively, like among the worst defensemen defensively in the league, which is where Toronto kind of struggles. So that's not exactly logical for them. They are kind of doubling down on the sense of scoring more goals will win them playoff series rather than playing strong defense, which has not worked. So I am interested to see how that works, but Klingberg, I'm not high on. He can score as many points as he wants in the power play. His defensive game really sucks. To not mince words. So McCabe and Klingberg versus, like, Sanderson and Zub. I'm taking Sanderson and Zub by far, and Leaf fans will probably underrate Zub and think that he's not, on the same tier. To me, he's in the same tier as Klingberg, if not higher. I love Zub. He was I think he ranked 5th on my final power rankings. I thought he was extremely underrated this year. Produced very impressive defensive numbers. Best defensive numbers among Ottawa's defensemen, actually, Artem Zub. So if you thought he had a bad year, you're entitled to your opinion, but if you go and look at the numbers, and I've broken it down a few times, like, he actually was their best defensive defenseman this year, and he played hard minutes and started in more defensive situations and less offensive situations than any other defenseman. So, like, hate on Zub all you want, nonsense fans, but this guy is the, like, underrated player on the team, low-key, so keep that in mind. Jake Sanderson, we've talked about him, arguably, like, Ottawa's number one defenseman over Chabot and Chychrun. Yes, Toronto fans, you heard that right. That is because he's underrated. Like, he doesn't get his recognition. He's coming off of a fantastic rookie season in which, for the final half, too, he earned a bigger role. He played a huge role in the penalty kill, but 5v5 as well, and on the power play. He kind of does it all, and he's, again, game breaker, impact defenseman. Love that term because that's what Ottawa has. And then if we want to, I'll just go through the whole defense. Like, if we want to go to Giordano and Liljegren, like, I'm going to take them over Ottawa's pairing because I do like that depth. I think Toronto has them beat on depth. Ottawa's would be Brandstrom and Hamonic or Bernard Docker. Either way, I like that third pairing for Toronto. I will say that they did a good job with the depth, so as they won't have any liabilities on the ice necessarily. But I just think that Ottawa's top four is so far superior to Toronto's, and maybe that's bold, but I'm not high on Brody or Klingberg. McCabe, to me, is even kind of an average second pairing defenseman. Riley's their one impact guy, and I still think that Riley is maybe the same tier as Chabot in them, but he's close to even being on the edge too. I'm not that high on him. So Toronto's forwards way better in my opinion than Ottawa's as a whole, but Ottawa's defense way better than Toronto's as a whole, in my opinion. So go ahead with how you feel on Toronto's defense versus Ottawa's.
It's exactly how I feel, and that's why I said on paper it looks a little different. And while we were going through the forwards, in the back of my head, I'm like thinking about Toronto's defense just as we're doing it, and in the back of my head, just thinking Ottawa's trumps all of this. And we've had the discussion, everyone has, about Riley versus Chabot and all this, and it's a good comparison, I think. Like, they're the same kind of player, I'd say, just offensively driven, whatever. But we've both kind of said that Chabot's the third best defenseman on this team going into next season, in my opinion, anyway. I think Chychrun's better than him, and I think Sanderson's better than him. So if that's the case, then Morgan Rielly as the top defenseman in Toronto is now compared with the third best in Ottawa, in our opinions. And look, if Chabot is the best defenseman, then it's a different discussion, but it's kind of the same. Like it's different than all the other teams. Whereas like, you had a Charlie McAvoy, you had Rasmus Dahlin, you had a Hedman, that were trump cards, like we mentioned with Nylander and all those other guys. The Leafs don't have that on the blue line, and the Sens do. The Sens have three guys who are legitimately, who if they were on the Leafs, would legitimately be the number one defenseman on Toronto, and that's just an automatic, like, take the Sens decor over the Leafs without a doubt. The other thing too, you look at the age there. If you're not on the YouTube, I'll run through the ages here starting with Rielly. He's 29. TJ Brody's 33. McCabe is 29. Klingberg's 31. Giordano's 39. And then Liljegren's 24. So outside of Liljegren, that has to be one of the oldest decors in the NHL. Like, that is not good. And especially you consider that TJ Brody had a bad year last year. According to a lot of Leafs fans, and a lot of what they talk about is geared towards the playoffs, obviously, because that's what's under the microscope in Toronto. It's like Mark Giordano had a bad playoffs. I don't think McCabe was great either. Brody struggled in that second round. Like, you can't really expect a guy like TJ Brody at the age of 33 to bounce back next season, right? You kind of expect a bit of a drop off. So I think age, even if it's just for one season, has to be factored in for Ottawa. Like, they've got so much potential on their blue line. You got Chabot coming off a bad year, but he's 25, 26 years old. You can expect him to kind of turn it around. So that's why I going into next season, a lot of these guys are going to be UFAs in Toronto and stuff like that. Like, they're not locked up long term, let's say, but everyone on this decor except for Liljegren at some point this season is going to turn 30 years old, which is nuts. So I think I'm taking Ottawa's, even with that in mind, and then I take in the X factor, or the trump card effect, and Chychrun, Sanderson, and Chabot are arguably all better than Morgan Rielly, who's the best defenseman on the Leafs. So easily taking the Sens blue line, which is a fun thing to say. I can't lie. It's been a long time where we can be confident in the Sens blue line. Even like, I think Brandstrom and Liljegren can be a good comparison too in that 5 slot, which is good. But I think you're right. I do take that bottom pairing. I think Giordano, despite his age, probably a better option than Hamonic. But if JBD steps in and can take a role from Hamonic and he's effective, then it's a clean sweep for the Sens on the blue line.
It is, yeah, and yeah, it's weird to say that Ottawa's defense is good, straight up, just because last season they entered with Nikita Zaitsev still there, and it's just like it's bizarre to feel like they actually have a really good defense. So it feels awesome though, regardless. And Toronto, I'm interested to see how they fare this year, because their defense has been their issue. Like, they've had the forward star power, you know what I mean? They've had the guys who can score goals and put the puck in the net. And again, they kind of doubled down by adding Klingberg, who is really good offensively, but terrible defensively. They put a lot of pressure on Samsonov last year, and we can talk about the goalies here in a second. He did well. I don't know. I'm not big on their defense, and even their defensive forwards. Like, they don't have great infrastructure there. So, yeah, did you have something to add on that front?
One more for the defense, because I know already, I can see the comments just coming in, the tweets, whatever it is, because I've seen them already. The doubt with Chychrun, and we have it too, is the health, right? Because he hasn't really played a full year in a long time. The health has been a concern. That's what Leafs fans will point to, be like, yeah, he's better, but he's not going to play. Look at the games played for the blue line they had last year, and I'll spell it out just like their age. Morgan Rielly, 65 games. TJ Brody, 58. Jake McCabe, 76, I think that says. John Klingberg, 67. Giordano, 78. 39-year-old Giordano played 78 games. And then Liljegren played 67. They weren't healthy either. And actually, funny enough, last season, I think they had all of their regular defensemen out or something like that at one point, and they won 7 of 8 games, which is insanely impressive. So they were able to overcome those injuries. But, Chychrun might not play a full 82 games. I don't expect him to be honest. But if the Leafs fans are using that as an argument for why they take their own blue line over the Sens blue line, their own blue line isn't healthy either, and they're not as good. So I'm taking the better player if health is a concern, because health is a concern for all of their players too.
It is, and yeah, I mean, this is all health permitting. Of course, every comparison is health permitting, and that it just is what it is. But like, anybody can get injured at any time, so it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I'm not huge on just like saying, yeah, we're gonna take Toronto's worst players because Chychrun could get hurt. Like, that's kind of silly to me. So, anyways, yeah, good point. We're gonna move on to the goalies here. where I think it's interesting and it's a little more difficult because Toronto, they've got Ilya Samsonov and then Joseph Woll, and it's tough here because Ottawa's got Korpisalo and Forsberg, but Samsonov had a really good year last year after, not having a few good years. So the question is kind of, can he do that again? And we've seen it with a few of the comparisons so far is like, do we expect Samsonov to put up a 919 save percentage again? It's hard to say he won't just because he just did. So it's kind of easier to say he'll do it again than he won't. But obviously he's on a good team too. I think their defense is going to be a struggle though. And I am interested to see if that impacts him because obviously they weren't fantastic last year defensively, but they really, that defense core is really rough in their own end by the looks of it. So we'll see. Joseph Woll, 7 games only last year, but he put up a 932 save percentage and a 6-1 record. The thing is here is the same can be said about Jonas Korpisalo, right? Like he just had a really good year where he dominated in a terrible Columbus environment, and then he went to LA and was really good. He put up like a 921 save percentage in LA over like 15 games or something. Can he do it again? I mean, I'm asking the same question about him. So I think the goalies here are comparable. Like, of course, Woll as well is going to be a rookie. We haven't seen much of him. I'd probably take Korpisalo and Forsberg just because of that they actually have the tandem. But at the same time, if Samsonov is playing at the level he did last year, I'd probably take him over both of Ottawa's goalies, depending on how they play. Because Korpisalo had a really good year too, like I said. This one's tough for me. I want you to go ahead with this because in my mind, they're kind of equal just based on Samsonov having, like, Samsonov based on last year is like the top tier, but then at the same time, Korpisalo was close to him, right? So how do you feel about the goalies moving forward here for both teams?
I like that point a lot about how Korpisalo kind of did the same thing as Samsonov last year. Korpisalo just ended up getting a bigger contract, and we can debate that all you want, but I think Samsonov's a good goalie. I think he was perfect for the Leafs last year, came in motivated, needed to get a deal, and he did, and he played really well. I would do the tier thing again, right? Because obviously, clearly right now, the Leafs are going with that one starter mentality, or maybe they aren't. Joseph Woll, I think that he's been a pretty highly regarded prospect in their system for a long time. And in his numbers there, he played 7 games last year, 932 save percentage. That's not nothing, right? Those are great numbers for such a limited sample size. But with Matt Murray on the LTIR, so he's probably not going to play next season. Like, with experience, you're going to be leaning a lot on Samsonov if Woll is just going to be a backup, because I don't think they're going in with a tandem mindset. So in that regard, I got to take Ottawa's, right? Because I think the fact that we're having this kind of discussion about, is Korpisalo better than Samsonov? But like Forsberg's right there with Korpisalo too. Like they're close and it's going to be a tandem here. I'm going to take the tandem over the starter because the starter isn't that good. And not to say that he's not good, but he's not that good where he's a Vasilevsky or an Ullmark or like all the other goalies who go on there, or even a Bobrovsky, but even then they have a tandem because Spencer Knight is a proven goalie. So again, I'm not doubting Joseph Woll. He had a great backup role last season, or a third string role with 7 games. But if, we come back to this next season and he's played 40 games and has the same numbers, totally different discussion in my opinion. So right now I'm taking Ottawa's just because they have 2 and the Leafs have 1. If that makes sense. I can see Samsonov having a better year than both of them though. But these are the numbers that would be great if Ottawa could have, right? Just above a 910 save percentage for each goalie, and the Sens are probably making the playoffs. So that's where I stand on the goaltending. I hope that kind of helped you out with your discussion there.
Yeah, it did, and I agree with you because of the tier thing that you said mostly. Like, I think that Samsonov, although you could put him above Ottawa's goalies, like I think he's in the same tier as Korpisalo based on last year. And yeah, he's just not that guy where he's one of the top 5 premier goalies who you can say like he puts them over the edge. I don't see that at all for him. I think he is a good goalie. I think he's above average based on last year, but I think Korpisalo was too. So, yeah, I would take Ottawa's tandem, but I'm gonna kind of say that they're equal in my mind, just because I think that Samsonov is still the top guy by a smidge. Like he's just not definitively there. So. Yeah, I'm going to kind of put the goalies as equal, and that kind of brings us to the whole lineup, which we said that the forwards for Toronto, I mean, that's where they really shine, right? That's their huge thing, and why they're the favorite is the forwards. Excellent star power, good depth, and it's just a well-built forward core for the regular season anyways. Like, it's a little asterisk there, but that kind of pushes them over the edge as a whole, and again, why they're the favorite. Ottawa's defense, to me, far superior than Toronto's defense. Now, again, that's defensemen. Like, when it comes to the actual defensive game, we still need to see Ottawa's guys buy in a little bit up front. I know, like, Batherson, obviously a big one, and even Brady at times is one of them who kind of just has to buy in a little more defensively in their own end. We need to see that. But defenseman-wise, like, positionally, love Ottawa's compared to Toronto's. Not a fan of Toronto's, which I think could really come back to hurt them. Goalies, for me, they're kind of equal. For Jack, he's leaning Ottawa with the tandem. But regardless, they're close, I think, is kind of the takeaway there, just based on tiers, because Samsonov is kind of the top guy. And yeah, do you have any other thoughts on this Ottawa versus Toronto thing? I think we need to mention that for people, if they're watching this, Toronto fans, and they're angry, like, you're the favorite. Like, that's congratulations. Like, you're the favorite. We are putting you above Ottawa in the rankings here. This isn't supposed to be Ottawa's better than Toronto or anything. No. It's just comparing the lineups, like, from a infrastructure standpoint. So I hope that was informative. I mean, for me, again, leaving this feeling better about, how I feel about Toronto's lineup, knowing more about them. I hadn't really looked at the whole lot before. So I think that'll kind of help us in the season too. When they play each other, we're going to have more of a better understanding, more knowledge to share about how, matchups and whatnot. So yeah, do you have any other thoughts on this kind of Ottawa versus Toronto comparison?
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, I think after we did the first one, we just both realized, like, this is a great idea, because we're getting more perspective on other teams that the Sens are going to be competing against. And with the thing with this is, like, yeah, the Leafs are the better team on paper, and that's what this whole exercise is. It's until the team goes out and does it, you can't really say they're better. Like, the Leafs could go out next year and lose all 4 games to Ottawa, but still be higher in the standings and be the better team overall. But it's more about matchups and everything like that. Personally, I know that it's kind of a meme that Ottawa's kind of had Toronto's number the last few years. And yeah, they've played well against them in some games, but overall, even with the core, I've just felt that, specifically with the Leafs, I felt that the Leafs core, or the Leafs top players, have just outclassed Ottawa's for the last few years. And I'm free to admit that as a Sens fan. Like, it's not a bad thing, because the Sens are young. But this is the year when I talk about expectations, when I talk about, holding them to a different standard than we have in the past. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Like, when they go up against the Leafs, I want Brady Tkachuk being a thorn in Matthews' side, because I don't think we've seen that enough when they play the Leafs. And I don't think there's anything more to it. I just think that they're those kind of players. Like, so that's what I'm holding them to, is I want the Sens to be able to start competing with this team. And it's, as we just proved, totally reasonable to expect that this year. The gap between, I would go as far as to say, the gap between the Leafs and Sens forwards is smaller than the gap between the Sens and Leafs D, if that makes sense. I think the Sens forward core is just loaded with potential, and we haven't seen the best out of most of them. Whereas the Leafs D core, we've seen the best out of most of those guys. So that's how I'm going with it. And I think, look, we're not trying to be fair. We're not catering to any Leafs fans. If you're watching this still and you are mad at what we say, I don't care, to be quite frank, and I don't think Brennan does either. We appreciate the like, though, or please like the video and then subscribe to it. And thank you for watching or listening. So that's what's kind of the exercise, though. Like you said, it's to get a different perspective on the teams they're going to be competing against. And yeah, now, like, in your head, you can maybe think, oh, you know what, I like the Sens top 6 over the Leafs top 6. But then you break it down like this and you go, you know what, okay, the Leafs are better up front. Star power, everything, depth, they're better up front. That's okay. But the Sens have a better blue line. Goaltending is a bit of a toss-up. That's why we do this, because now we have different perspectives. So like you said, we'll go into next season with a bit of a refreshed mind, training camp, whatever it is. So I think that can wrap it up there for episode 33. We usually record on Sundays, Mondays. I'm going to assume we're going to do Monday. We'll talk about it, but episode 34 will come to you at some point next week. Maybe some Sens news to break down, usually a bit of a news dump on Mondays. And with training camp ramping up, I'm expecting most of the players to kind of arrive in the next week, 2 weeks to Ottawa to start their training and just in preparation of training camp. So we will follow all of that, obviously, give you updates. Like I said, subscribe to the YouTube page, subscribe to everydaysens.com for in-depth analysis that will ramp up as the season and training camp starts up. So for Brendan Parks, I'm Jack Richardson. Thank you for watching the Everyday Sens podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.